The night was cold, the kind of biting chill that crept under your skin no matter how tightly you pulled your coat around you. On the cracked sidewalks of a forgotten neighborhood, dim yellow street lamps buzzed overhead, their light barely cutting through the dark. In the shadows sat Mr. Elijah Carter, a 72-year-old man with skin weathered like old leather, his beard peppered with gray, his back hunched from years of labor. Most in the neighborhood knew him only as Old Man Carter, the quiet figure who spent evenings sitting on the worn bench outside the small church on Madison Street. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. His eyes sharp, heavy with memory spoke for him. But this night, Elijah's silence was broken. Down the street, muffled cries pierced the air. At first, he thought it was just another argument behind closed doors. In this part of town, people had grown numb to shouting and turning the TV volume up, closing their blinds, pretending they didn't hear. But Elijah had a broken bar he couldn't pretend. The cries grew louder. It wasn't just shouting, it was fear, desperation, the kind of sound that made Elijah's chest tighten, because he'd heard it before decades ago, in another life, from someone he couldn't save. He rose slowly from the bench, leaning on his cane, and followed the sound. At the corner of 5th and Alder, through a cracked apartment window, he saw her, a young woman barely in her 20s, clutching a small child against her chest. A man stood over her, his fists clenched, his voice like thunder. His shadow loomed across the peeling wallpaper, sharp and violent. Elijah froze, his heart pounding. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew that look in her eyes, the silent plea, the hopelessness. And something inside him snapped. The next morning, sunlight crept through Elijah's small curtains, painting golden stripes across the faded quilt on his bed. He hadn't slept much. His mind replayed the night before over and over again, the terrified eyes of the young mother, the bruises on her arms, the way she clutched her child as though shielding them from the entire world. Her name, he had learned in the chaos, was Mariah, and her baby boy, barely 3 years old, was named Caleb. Elijah sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his knees the way he always did when the pain reminded him of his age. But this morning, the ache was different. It wasn't just his body, it was the weight of choice. He hadn't just broken up a fight, he had crossed the line. He had stepped into someone else's storm. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of their story. Around noon, a soft knock rattled his door. When Elijah opened it, Mariah stood there, her son pressed shyly against her leg. She looked tired, her eyes swollen from crying, but there was a light in her face too, something fragile, like hope fighting to stay alive. "A broken bar, I didn't know where else to go," she whispered, voice trembling. Elijah didn't say much. He just stepped aside, letting her in. Inside, his small home smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The walls were lined with books, framed photos of family long gone, and a cross above the mantel. Mariah glanced around nervously, holding Caleb close. Elijah poured her tea. She sat at the table, hands shaking as she held a cup. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, slowly, her story poured out. She had been with her partner, Darnell, since she was 16. At first, he was charming, protective, promising her the world. But over time, his protection turned into possession, his words into fists, his love into control. She tried to leave, more than once. Each time, he found her. Each time, it got worse. Elijah listened quietly, his face unreadable, but inside, his heart broke. He had seen this story before yet too many times, and he had lost someone once because he hadn't spoken up soon enough. Mariah looked up at him then, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Why broken bar? Why did you help me?" "Nobody ever does." Elijah's voice was deep, rough from years of silence. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody does."